good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You're listening to the Thai Expat Daily Show. I'm your host Kieran Mack and thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like this video if you're watching us on YouTube and please do subscribe. We're also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music and a host of other podcast players. Now that that's all done, let's jump into today's show. And we'll start off with the first story of the day. Government search for African visitors. The Immigration Bureau and the Ministry of Public Health are tracking down about 783 African travellers who have entered Thailand since November 15th. They are seeking to test them for the Omicron coronavirus variant in a move aimed to maximise public safety. The African visitors are believed to be in major tourist destinations including Bangkok, and the authorities are trying to reach them and ask them to undergo a test to find out if they have the new strain. National Police Chief Police General Suat said, "Don't panic. The police are urgently working together with the Ministry of Public Health to take care of this matter," he said. The Immigration Police and the Ministry are also maximising COVID-19 control measures at the airports in the face of escalating health threats reportedly brought about by the new variant, he said. Security authorities are also heightening border security measures to curb illegal border crossings through natural trails in the border provinces, he said, adding a rising number of illegal migrants have been detained. From November 15th until last Saturday, a total of 333 people from 8 southern African countries, currently banned by several countries from entering, have entered Thailand, said Dr. Toisat, spokesperson for the CCSA. The countries are Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa and Zimbabwe. Thailand has also imposed a similar travel ban on visitors from these countries starting on Wednesday, he said. Of the 333, 3 have already left Thailand. He said 23 of them have contacted through mobile phone texting and requested to undergo an RT-PCR test for COVID-19. The test is being offered for free at state-run hospitals, he said. For more information about this specific COVID-19 testing requirement, the African visitors are encouraged to call the hotline 1442, he said. Those who refuse to comply with this requirement may face legal action for violating Thailand's communicable disease control law, he said. Since November 15, Thailand has also begun imposing a 14-day COVID-19 quarantine on travellers from these 8 African countries, he said. For Thai nationals who return from any of these African countries from November 15th until last Saturday and could not afford the cost of the quarantine service at a hotel, they were allowed to undergo COVID-19 quarantine at the state-run Infectious Disease Institute, he said. More than 100 people who have previously arrived in Thailand from other countries also considered at high-risk zones from the Omicron variant are also being required to undergo a repeat RT-PCR test. Citing updates reported at yesterday's meeting of the Ministry of Emergency Operations Centre, he said most symptoms of infection from the Omicron variant remain similar to common symptoms of infection from the older variants, including muscle pains. However, even though there still have not been any reports about severe illness linked with the Omicron variant infection, several deaths linked to this strain have been reported, he said. As for the expected faster transmission of the new variant, he said, there has yet to be any proof to confirm this speculation. As for now, he said, being fully vaccinated against COVID-19 is still the best defense against catching the disease. Now also then to update, Phuket health authorities ordered 130 tourists who entered the province from November 15 to 27 to go into quarantine for 14 days to prevent the COVID-19 Omicron variant from spreading. That was according to the Phuket Information Centre announced today. After the 130 complete their quarantine, they must undergo RT-PCR testing to confirm they are completely free of COVID-19. Now it seems everybody is just going crazy over this Omicron variant and there seems to be no logic to what the government are doing. Why are these people being quarantined if they've already tested negative 1 or 2 times beforehand? It seems rather silly. At the end of the day, we all know no matter how hard you try to stop the variant or COVID entering the country, it will eventually get here. We all know that. Look at Delta. It got in. They did the same thing. They shut the borders. They were inspecting everybody, PCR tests. I mean, the country was shut down at that point when the Delta variant entered. You could only get into Thailand, by doing 14 days quarantine. So at the end of the day, no matter how hard they try, it will get here eventually, and it's dealing with it when it gets here. I think this searching for people throughout the country is not a good look. I think it's very unfair to people who've come here on holidays to be shoved into quarantine for 14 days, even though they've tested negative for COVID. It seems a little ridiculous to me. And again, overreaction by Thailand and many countries around the world as well, knowing very little about this actual variant too. So this is where we are at the moment. Seems all a bit crazy, but as I say, we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll obviously report back anything to do with Omicron and the new variant and Thailand in the future. And moving along, SRT unveils new city-friendly routes. The State Railway of Thailand, SRT, has unveiled its new suburban railway routes to be used once Bangkok Grand Station becomes Bangkok's rail system hub, replacing the 105-year-old Hua Lamphong station on December 23rd. After the closure of Hua Lamphong, the SRT will alter the final destination of Northern and Northern Eastern lines, so they stop at Bangkok Grand Station, while the Eastern line will stop at Khaosan Station. Changes to the Southern line will have been postponed to next year. The plan follows a 20-year national strategy aimed at reducing level crossings in 27 locations in the capital to help alleviate traffic congestion, the Deputy Director General of the Rail Transportation said on Wednesday. Since the official launch of the Red Line Railway on Monday, the SRT has received positive feedback, he said, while adding more than 10,000 commuters who use the line daily. Mr. Pichette said Transportation Minister also told the SRT to launch public hearings to hear feedback about the proposed closure of the 3 railway lines to Hua Lamphong prior to December 23rd. Currently, 118 trains head to Hua Lamphong, passing 826 times through level crossings per day, causing traffic congestion on 7 busy roads, including Prajapat, Ranong and Phetchaburi roads at Yamarat intersection. If railway services were cut to 22 trains a day, the traffic jams would be greatly reduced, thus benefiting commuters, he said. Moreover, when the plan is implemented, there will be 7 fewer level crossings on the northern and northeastern lines and 3 fewer on the eastern and southern lines, he added. So mainly for people in Bangkok and the SRT train that will be running from various parts of the city. It will be good news, I guess, in relation to alleviating traffic, but also losing a landmark like the Hua Lamphong station is a bad thing and has come for a lot of criticism from many people in Bangkok and around Thailand. And next up, Philippines suspends decision to allow vaccinated tourist entry. The Philippines has temporarily suspended a decision to allow fully vaccinated tourist entry in a bid to prevent a new, heavily mutated coronavirus variant taking off in the country, where most of the population remains unvaccinated. It comes as the Southeast Asian nation on Monday launched a 3-day vaccination drive targeting 9 million people as young as 12 in an effort to accelerate the rollout of jabs. So far, the country has not reported any cases of the Omicron strain, which was first detected in South Africa and has since spread around the globe. Manila announced plans last week to allow fully vaccinated tourists from most countries to enter from December 1 as it seeks to revive the nation's battered economy. But the government's COVID-19 task force reversed course over the weekend as it announced the suspension of flights from 7 European countries, in addition to an earlier ban on arrival from several African nations. The IATF deemed it necessary to suspend the entry of foreign tourists given worldwide concern over the Omicron variant, the Bureau of Immigration Commissioner Jamie Morente said Monday, using the acronym for the task force. The decision is a major blow to tourism operators across the archipelago nation, which has been devastated by a plunge in international visitors and restrictions on domestic travel since borders shut in March 2020. Tourism is a major driver of the country's economy, accounting for nearly 13% of its GDP in 2019, when more than 8 million people visited, official data shows. That slumped to 5.4% last year as tourist arrivals plummeted to 82% to 1.48 million. The government has eased virus restrictions in recent weeks as the daily infection rate hovers at the lowest level since the beginning of the year and the nationwide vaccination rate increases. But the emergence of Omicron has raised fears curbs could be reimposed. Around 1/3 of the country's 110 million people are fully vaccinated. The Philippines has recorded more than 2.8 million infections since the start of the pandemic, including over 48,000 deaths. So here's another country that had planned to reopen and now has shelved it completely. And of course, it's fear over the Omicron virus, but we still don't know that much about it. And I mean, if you set up adequate safety measures coming into the country, why do you need to cancel the reopening of your country? And that should be a question people should be asking. If you trust your systems that you set up, then you shouldn't be fearing a variant of COVID. At the end of the day, we're going to have to live with this, and there is going to be mutations in the future, and we can't just keep shutting down the world every time there's a new mutation. And that has to be, I guess, the story that people need to be telling. If we continue like this, we are never going to get out of it, and we're never going to see our lives return to some kind of normality. And I think we can see the reaction of governments around the world, and I think it's driving people absolutely crazy right now. And a lot of people are unwilling to accept more of the same after being promised get vaccinated and you can start to return to your life as it was before. But it seems that's not the case anymore. And moving along, Prime Minister, no national lockdown, but bars probably won't reopen. The government will not impose a national lockdown despite overseas concerns about the Omicron variant of COVID-19, but the closure of entertainment venues will likely be extended, the Prime Minister said on Thursday. Prayut Chan-o-cha said a nationwide closure was unnecessary. The government would cope by continuing to test arriving travellers for the new variant. Harsh measures are not necessary. There are RT-PCR tests and quarantine is required pending test results, he said. The government needed to prioritise both public safety and the national economy. It was not easy to keep the balance. Under the circumstances, the government would delay its plan for antigen testing of arrivals instead of the RT-PCR tests, the Prime Minister said. In the interest of public safety, the government might also have to further delay the reopening of pubs, bars and karaoke shops, he said. We would like to wait and see for a month. In this matter, we must listen to doctors and health authorities, General Prayut said. Enclosed venues where crowds gather and drink pose high risk. That will be put on hold. Assistance measures will be proposed to the Cabinet soon, the Prime Minister said. When there is a new disease, there must be measures to cope with it, he added. General Prayut confirmed that the government was tracing arrivals from South Africa for COVID-19 tests because Omicron infections were detected from that region. He asked the public to inform the government if they know of the whereabouts of such people. He said no Omicron cases have been detected in Thailand to date. Now this is getting on from our story yesterday where I spoke about bars in Pattaya and even restaurants down there not being allowed to reopen for whatever reason. Now this is just taking the piss out of people, I think, at this stage. I mean, this is basically saying, look, January 16th is just not going to be happening. And that is an absolute huge blow to anybody in the industry throughout the country. Now, we do know that some places are open and they all serve under the table, fair enough. But there's one thing serving under the table and having, the threat of the law coming down on you, and another thing being able to freely trade. And unfortunately, I really do feel this could be the end of many, many kind of bars and clubs and even restaurants throughout Thailand that generally rely on alcohol sales, even within a restaurant, because food costs and food margins can be pretty low compared to the, margins on alcohol and other things like that. So it's going to be a devastating blow for many, many people. Now then, of course, you look at Phuket and they're talking about indoor places and, not being a good to have indoor open. But if you go to Phuket and Patong and Bangla Road, clubs there are wide open. They're not serving food. There's parties, nightclubs, DJs, people dancing, having a great time, and it's fantastic to see. You can't say, well, one section of the country can't do it while another has free reign to do whatever they want. That's just completely wrong. And there should be a standard across the country for everything, and it should be the same. If Pattaya is not allowed to open up, but Phuket is, what's the reason? And we're not even talking about, nightclubs. We're just talking about restaurants here. But they're able to have a music festival with thousands of people going to it in Pattaya, but a restaurant can't open up and serve a beer. This makes no sense. And as I said, I believe there is a war on the entertainment industry in Thailand. And it's been going on a while with this government. And I think their plan is to slowly get rid of it. And this is their mechanism. Because there's no logic to what they're talking about. If you allow Bangkok to open and Phuket to open, but other places cannot. Because if it's science-based, then the science would cover the whole country, not just certain parts of the country, if you understand what I mean. So yeah, to me, it seems like there's certainly a plan in place here, and yeah, they're implementing it well. So for people who thought maybe they'd be coming on January 16th, I will say now, probably, let's say even 100%, they will not be reopening. They'll have reasons for it, and they'll try condone them. And yeah, people will be out of business. Now they're talking about, helping people out financially. But sure, they haven't done it in the last 2 years, so why would they suddenly start doing it now? That's the other thing. These people have basically got by on their own for 2 years, struggled through, and now the government are saying, oh, well, we might help you out. I wonder, is that the same way they helped out the airlines with their talk about loans for 2 years, but that's never happened. And we'll be coming to a story about Nok Air, who are still talking about getting loans from the government, but still hasn't happened. So yeah, it is unfortunate, and I think finding excuses but not having a science behind it and not using that science to cover the whole country is what the real issue here is within Thailand at the moment. But I'd love to know your opinion on it all. a lot of people who listen to this show are outside. Are bars and clubs open where you live? What are the rules to go to a bar and a club? Do you have to show a vaccine certificate? Can you just go in without one? Do you have to wear a mask? I'd love to know in your country, wherever you may be right now, what is open and what are the regulations to go to these places. Please do leave your comments down below in the comment section as always. And next up, the complete opposite of Pattaya. Restaurants in Central World, Khaosan areas roar back to life. Restaurants in Bangkok's Central World and Khaosan areas were full of visitors on Wednesday night after the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration allowed venues to serve alcohol until 11 p.m. The atmosphere in both areas was bustling again compared to a few weeks ago when restaurants were instructed to serve alcohol only until 9 p.m. Many restaurants have complied with measures to contain the spread of COVID-19, such as setting up checkpoints, providing hand sanitizing gels, and limiting the number of customers. Metropolitan Police Division 6 Deputy Commander Police Colonel Nitiwat, who led a team of police and related officials in a survey of restaurants in the Central World area, said 452 visitors tested negative for COVID-19. He added that the police would continue to create awareness among restaurants in a bid to reduce the risk of COVID-19 spreading. Meanwhile, a Khaosan restaurant operator said he was glad that the BMA was now allowing them to serve alcohol until 11 p.m. as it would generate additional revenue and attract more customers. So there you see, in Bangkok it can be done, and anybody can as long as you comply with the rules and regulations. So yeah, it would be baffling as to why nobody else in the country can do it as well. But maybe that's just down to individual governors. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, it seems to be the case that Bangkok is starting to get back a certain amount of normality within the nighttime scene. And next up, Nok Air laments lack of passengers. Air passenger traffic after Thailand's reopening on November 1 has not lived up to operators' expectations as demand from foreign tourists has been lukewarm, says Nok Air. The airline rehired workers and resumed operations nationwide, but passengers and revenue are not even at 40% of 2019 levels, said Nok Air chief executive. He said the airline's international passengers at Don Mueang Airport in November were less than 1% of the pre-pandemic total. Some tourists booked cross-regional flights from Phuket to Chiang Mai, but demand remains soft. The number of domestic passengers also pales in comparison with the same period last year, despite the stimulus program We Travel Together. Nok Air had 80 flights per day in November last year, but frequencies have dropped to 60 flights recently, even though the load factor last month increased to 83% from 70% in 2022. Based on the slow recovery, Mr. Wuttipum said the airline must accelerate a plan to secure a 280 million baht loan by the first quarter of next year to support cash flow. The airline must wait for the government's approval to add 6 new Boeing 737-800 jets. By the end of this year, Nok Air expects to operate 19 aircraft. 3 Q400 jets will be taken out of operation to restructure its fleet and pave the way for 6 new aircraft, he said. Mr. Wuttipum said the airline's revenue might fully recover in 2 years if tourists from mainland China are allowed to take overseas trips by next October and the airline can secure new aircraft as planned. It would also have to assess the impact from the COVID-19 Omicron variant globally, he said. Mr. Wuttipum said Nok Air aims to resume international flights to Osaka, Japan, India and Taiwan by next April. Routes to regional countries such as Vietnam might resume earlier if there is enough demand and more relaxed travel routes and rules, he said. Yes, I hope they're not pinning their recovery on the Chinese market because, I mean, the way things are going at the moment, I doubt China will be open in the next 5 years. Whenever they have a single case of COVID, it seems cities are shut down and millions upon millions of people go into RT-PCR testing mode. So yeah, no, and with the new Omicron variant, I'm sure China will not be opening up for a long time. To be honest, I really don't see travel in Asia and Southeast Asia improving over the next 6 to 8 months. My personal view is that we're probably going to see more restrictions coming into countries rather than, reductions as they've kind of promised. You see what Singapore are basically doing their own sandbox, Cambodia are basically doing their own version of a test and go system, and now you see Japan have basically barred foreign flights coming into the country, and I can see Korea and other countries following along this line with the new Omicron variant because there is a complete overreaction right now to it. That just seems the way things are going right now, and I think if you are planning to travel, you need to have patience and bear in mind that a lot of the countries in Asia are just being overly cautious and may make things difficult for you if you plan to travel. And finally, the Phuket news. Phuket marks 96 new COVID cases, no new deaths. The latest Phuket Provincial Public Health Office daily COVID situation report has marked 96 new local infections confirmed across the island yesterday, bringing the total number of people recognised as infected with COVID-19 in Phuket since April 3rd to 17,903. Police check Phuket town venues for COVID-19 compliance. Police conducted a check on entertainment venues in Phuket town last weekend in order to ensure that COVID-19 related health and safety measures were being appropriately adhered to. And finally, in hunt for Omicron, Phuket health officials yet to locate 40 African tourists. Phuket health officials have yet to locate 40 tourists who have arrived in Phuket since November 15th in their campaign to track down any new arrivals who may have brought the Omicron variant of COVID-19 to the island. But ultimately, with this story or anything else that stood out to you today, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Because yes, this is a news show, but it's also a conversation. Now keep that conversation going, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and do all the good stuff that does help that YouTube algorithm. But ultimately, my name is Kieran Mack, you've been listening to the Thai Expat Daily Show, and we will see you next time.